Welcome to the Influencer's Journey. This is where we explore the transformative power of mindset and the stories behind leaders who have shaped their own path to remarkable success. Each week, we embark on a journey to uncover the beliefs, habits, and inner strength required to not just be seen, but felt as a true person of influence.
Have you ever wondered how some leaders can navigate the most difficult circumstances and still remain positive, open, and willing to do more? Or why these leaders are able to inspire change in the most difficult of situations? Our topic today, why emotional awareness is a foundation of leadership. My name is Suzan Hart, and I am so thrilled that you're with us today. We are going to dive into a really deep conversation about emotional awareness. I want you to hear that. Emotional awareness and why it drives and empowers our leadership. Now, as we get started, I got to tell you, I am super excited for this conversation because the person I'm sitting down with, I heard her speak. And in the middle of her presentation, I said, I need to learn more about this woman. I need to know who she is, what makes her tick, and what's going on in that mind of hers. So the speaker and the leader I have the privilege to introduce is a speaker who's facilitated workshops for over 250,000 individuals. I want you to stop and think about that for a moment. 250,000. I believe at the age of 21, and she can correct me if I'm wrong there, she became the youngest Commonwealth Commissioner in Australia. The youngest. She's the author of Love Out Loud, I love this title, and the founder and CEO of In Truth. What I love about this particular woman in the short time I know her is her heart. So please help me welcome Nicole Gibson.
Susan, such a pleasure. I'm such a fan of your work, and I've been really excited for this conversation.
Oh, me too. And so just for everyone listening, when we met, it was in Bali about a month and a bit ago. It feels like a long time ago now, but it
Shout
wasn't
out to
long ago.
Michelle.
Yeah. Thank you, Michelle. And I was blessed to be the opening keynote, and you were the closing keynote. And the
Right.
thing that struck me was it was almost like we were the two perfect bookends.
It's like the full circle moment.
Yeah. And we had kind of sat down and talked through each other's presentations and said, this will fit really well.
Mm,
And as I listened to you and heard your story, as I said earlier, I was inspired to know more.
mm.
And so, for me, when I meet people with such depth, and that's the word I'm going to use, I often wonder, what's the story created such depth? And for you particularly, what's the story that created such depth at such a young age? So I want to start by giving you an opportunity to just let the listeners get an insight into who you are.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. No, I feel like I've been giving so many talks on tech and the future of tech. It's kind of nice to be like invited into a space where I can, talk about something other than tech. But I think the heart of why and really my journey and my story um has been the catalyst for everything that I'm creating in the world. And yeah, I guess as well the catalyst for this depth of calling that I've felt inside of me for such
Mhm.
a long time, really since my earliest memories. But I think through my teenage years in particular, that was something that really started to reveal itself. And I was sharing with you last time we spoke what some of that journey consisted of. And I had a very unconventional childhood. I went to heaps of different schools. It was like a school a year, pretty much. And so it was like the perfect priming, I think, for entrepreneurship, because I think the hallmark of an entrepreneur is change resilience and learning to be adaptable and not holding on to things too tightly. And I was getting schooled in that, pretty much since birth, growing up between the UK and Australia. And, in amongst that, also doing a lot of travel. It teaches you a lot of things about life, and I think for me, I learned very young that it's not a good idea to hold on to things too tightly, that change is this inevitable thing. And when you can really get to a place where you embrace that, the sky really does become the limit. Because I think the things that we hold on to so tightly can often become, the things that start to limit us, our attachments. But also that there's a nuance there, which I'd love to talk about. The difference between, say, detachment and non-attachment is something that I'm really personally passionate about, because I think there's a way of living in a let go and being in a surrendered space, without being disconnected and actually being really connected. And that was something that, as a very sensitive kid, I had to learn to find that balance. But my first love was theater, actually. And the older I became, the more I reflected on why, why was I so drawn to that space? And I really now realize that what that provided for me, when I was able to create this space as a performer and invite people into this space with me, there was a presence that would fall upon an audience, and there was a willingness to connect to depth and to vulnerability and to human emotion that I just couldn't find outside, that space of performance and acting. And so that actually catalyzed me to leave school at a very young age and pursue that. I went to an excellence academy and majored in theater. And I kind of had this concept that it was going to be like High School Musical every day, like the realities were a little bit different. It was actually, the best and worst years in some ways of my life, because I was immersed deeply in my first love. But it was also very competitive, and there was also a lot of pressure on us, and I didn't have the tools that I needed to learn to love myself, and cope effectively with that. But the theater itself, the theater that I connected to the most and that I majored in, was a style of theater called Meisner. And it's a derivative of method acting. And the premise is being 100% yourself under the given imaginary circumstances. And if you just sit with that for a second, what will hopefully start to reveal itself to you is the understanding that this style of performance actually isn't about acting at all. It's about connecting to the parts of you that could be that person under those circumstances. So if you were cast in a role where the set of circumstances in the scene was that forced you to steal or cheat or lie or kill, whatever it was, something that, in a sort of everyday sense, you would vehemently resist and be like, I'm not that person. I don't want to be seen as that person. At a very young age, I was being invited into the understanding that, well, that part of you does exist. You might not be in a set of circumstances throughout your life that forces the revealing of that part of you, but for many of us, it will, and that's inevitable. And I think we deny our shadow, way too much. And I realized very young that we're all things, and that the way that my director would work with us was very much about challenging the ego beyond that point of resistance. And so he didn't use spiritual language. He was a very philosophical character, but there was no spiritual language as such. But it was definitely, from my perspective, an initiation into a very spiritual way of understanding life. That there's really only one of us, and you're seeing you and you're perceiving you in all things. And so that led to a very early existential crisis where I started to question, well, what the hell is identity? Like why would I be this thing over that thing if I'm actually all things? And I think that was a very unique way to kind of go through adolescence as a starting point. And I had this other layer of the pressure and being so in love with this path and wanting to do anything in my power to be successful at it, which unfortunately, came with industry ideals. And I think that the compounding pressure of that journey led me to this point where I was dealing with a really critical eating disorder, and really being in denial, I think, of the fact that it had control over me and not the other way around. Because, you know, the interesting thing about, and I think a lot of people that have dealt with something like an eating disorder, especially people in performance or, you know, the public eye in some way, there's a lot of positive reinforcement until it gets to a place where, you know, you become a liability because your health is at serious risk. And that was a very hard thing to reconcile, you know, that I was kind of encouraged on this path, and it was celebrated, you know, in a lot of ways, until I got to this point where I was at risk, and then no one knew what to do about it. And being the deep thinker that I am, I kind of had this awareness even back then that what I was experiencing, yes, had on some level something to do with me, but actually on a broader level, it had a lot more to do with the way that people related to and understood vulnerability and challenging conversations. And so it was very defining, because at a young age, I experienced what it was to be the challenging conversation,
So
you
well
know.
said. That's so well said. Yeah.
And the emotional discomfort that would bring up, you know, and even in people that loved me very dearly, often those were the people that struggled the most. And I think that the thought that catalyzed, it's a big statement, but in some ways I really think that that's true. The thought that catalyzed what's become my 15-year pursuit in entrepreneurship, I think, was, you know, if this conversation is too challenging for the adults and the people around me, what other conversations are we not having as a world? And that really moved me. You know, it changed something very deep in me, where I recognized we can't solve any problem until we have the foundation of emotional capacity and emotional intelligence. And that, in my experience, there was very much a sensitive, loving human underneath the layer that was really confronting. And I think, you know, for anyone that's seen someone go through anorexia, I think the hallmark that separates it maybe from going through something like generalized anxiety disorder or depression or even other traumatic experiences that aren't so visible. You know, anorexia is kind of, it's there. You can't unsee it when someone's really in the throes of that condition. People couldn't hide the way that they felt about that fragility. And so it was a very raw, it was a very hard experience, it was a very raw experience. And it kind of allowed me, in some crazy way, to see through the illusions and the masks of society and really cut through to the reality of where we were. And I wanted to transform that problem. And it started to occur to me that's actually why I was drawn to performance, was because I was being given a space, and amongst the madness and what I felt as a kid, the fakeness often of the world, I was being given a refuge. But through my recovery, I wanted that to be something that I didn't have to escape to a theater room to find. I wanted that to be in the living room with my family. I wanted that to be at the dinner table with my friends. I wanted it to be crossing the street and talking to a stranger. I wanted to find that same intimacy in the world. And I couldn't find anyone that was working towards that. And I think, you know, that's the story of a lot of leaders, right? You're called to become the person you couldn't find.
Yeah. Absolutely. You know, as you talk, I know for myself, I do storytelling, and I love storytelling for similar reasons. Because one is, when I teach it, I always tell people, I want you to embody the story. And for many people, it's so vulnerable. And they're like, I don't want to go there. And I go, but we want to take the audience there to a certain extent. And for me, when I'm on stage and I'm telling stories, I know I can bring an audience to a place and space where they can see themselves in who I'm being,
Mm.
It's almost like giving them permission to validate that, if I'm going to use the word dysfunctional part of themselves, that part of themselves that's not meeting up to what society expects, all these different things. And I'm always amazed how many people, after I take the stage, are willing to come up and have that deeper conversation,
Yeah.
because in some way that story validated their piece of them that they haven't been willing to talk about, or they haven't
100%.
been willing to see. And I think, like you, I love that space.
Mm-hmm.
I love that honesty of conversation and that truth, because when we are able to look in those places is when we be able to see one more of ourselves, but
Yeah.
access to who we can become,
Yeah.
right? Um, and I think the other thing that is really beautiful about, how you're telling your story is the love and acceptance that comes with that, in
Mm.
terms of, can I accept myself for who I am, things I like and who I'm not,
Yeah.
and that's difficult for a lot of us. So thank you for that.
Of course. Yeah. I think it's so many layers of identity. And I think, in the conversation, maybe this will kind of reveal itself. But I think when it comes to being able to hold a certain level of emotional intelligence and emotional awareness, you've got to be able to see beyond identity. You've got to be able to see beyond belief, because you and I might have different beliefs about things. In fact, it's inevitable that we do, right? So
Mhm.
is that going to be the place that we draw a line and say, okay, well, connection is not possible because we believe different things? And I think we're seeing that actually in the world right now. It's such a mega scale where people's belief systems are kind of the full stop. And
Yeah, the
and
dividing.
there's so much more to it, to a human. There's so much more to you actually. And that there are things that you believed as a kid that you don't believe now. And does that make you wrong? Like,
Mhm.
we're allowed to change our mind. And I think coming into wholeness, these concepts I've found in so many spaces to be translated in such a kind of etheric way. And I try to make them very practical. Like, to come to a place of wholeness with yourself is to understand who you are beneath all those beliefs. Like, it's not out there, it's actually in here. you don't
Mhm.
you don't have to you don't have to search outside. You have to come home and understand that who you are as a being exists. If I could come and erase every belief in your mind, everything that you think you are, that doesn't erase you.
Mhm.
And I think is a very powerful thing to realize. I was very blessed to recognize it young, I think through the discipline of my art, and then also being so cast typed um, because of the eating disorder, and then having to get to a place in myself and with the world where I was like, this is not going to define me, and I think a lot of people experience that maybe later in life, or even a product of who they are, or how they came into this world, or it's something that they experience later because they're, I don't know, unhappy in their job, or they go through a breakup and that was so much a part of them, and they've got
Mhm.
to they've got to figure out, oh wow, life goes on.
Yeah.
That's
It- you
yeah.
know, I came to Canada at the age of 5, young Black girl, immersed
Mm,
into a white French Canadian culture,
yeah.
and English as well, and very acutely aware of my difference,
Mm,
and and that dynamic, I think, has been a blessing to me, because my first few years, you dance between both worlds, right?
yeah.
I have the secret world at home, which is this Black, Afrocentric Caribbean child, and then I go out
You
into
should
the
bring that
world,
out. Yeah,
right?
the world needs that.
And
Yeah.
then I go out into the world, and I'm trying to fit.
Yeah.
And I know for myself, what became my peace was my own acceptance,
Mhm.
and the scariness of it, the vulnerability, the transparency of it. However, the reality is I can't run from who I am, to the sense of the way I look. And I think what it allowed me to really get to was when I got past difference,
Yeah.
we were all quite the same. And
So
and I think it was I learned at an early age that the more accepting I was
mm,
of difference, the more juicy life became,
yeah,
the more
100%.
abundant life became. And I also realized that if I wanted to be accepted,
Mm,
I had to also be accepting.
that's it.
And it's a journey,
Yeah.
particularly in a society that says this is what it looks
Mm,
like.
yeah. This is success. This is beauty. This is whatever. I think just, even starting by challenging that against what you actually feel is an amazing place to begin. Because I'm sure you see this often with the people that you're working with in a coaching capacity, society has an ideal of success. But when you sit with someone and you say, well, what's success to you?
Yeah,
It
yeah,
almost never matches up, you
yeah,
know.
yeah,
And so, okay, this is society's ideal of beauty. Who are the people you've fallen in love with? And just start in your own process of inquiry and challenging these boxes that I think have kept so many people honestly enslaved,
yeah,
because it prevents them from having their own sense of expression and free thought. Um, and this is where I think the volatility of judgment, all of that, from my observation working with people, is a defense mechanism because they're hurting, you know.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And hurting and fragile,
yeah,
in that when I am not confident in who I am, I can't help but be fragile with the world, because
that's
it's
it.
almost like I have these sores that the world keeps picking at.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
So I definitely have some questions for you.
Get into
All
it.
right. So if you're just joining us, please let us know who you are, where you're joining us from, and what part of the world you're coming in from. If you have questions as we go along, I'm sure you're going to have questions for Nick. So put them in the comments section, ask them. We'll definitely get back to them. But the most important thing is let us know you're here. Join the conversation. Leave your comments. Leave your thoughts. If it's your first time joining us on YouTube, definitely subscribe and come on back. Let us know how you like the show. So for those of you who are just joining, welcome to the Influencer's Journey Show. Our topic today is why emotional awareness is the foundation of leadership. And I am sitting down with the beautiful Nicole Gibson. And as I said, I met her about a month and a bit ago in Bali, and I just loved her thought process. I just loved who this
Thank
being,
you.
and I wanted to know more. So, Nicole, the first thing, as we've been in conversation, and we've had for me, some really beautiful conversations.
100%.
Let everyone know, when you say emotional awareness, what is it, and why is it critical for leaders and leadership?
Such a great question. And there's actually important distinction here, because there's a few terms maybe that you'll hear me use generally, but also through this interview: emotional awareness, emotional capacity, and I put them both under the umbrella of emotional intelligence. And that's kind of been a lingo that I've created to try to, yeah, build a language around a conversation that can be so elusive for so many.
Yeah.
Um,
Say that again. Oh my God.
yeah, yeah, but it's not, and we're gonna get to that. There's a way of taking it out of the ether and actually making it something that's a lot easier to relate to, in yourself and in your social relationships as well. And emotional awareness to me is really the capacity to sit without the judgment in the way, to be able to perceive things um through the body and not just the mind,
Mhm.
and uh like allow things to really be as they are, to be able to perceive how someone else is feeling about something, and how people in a room are responding to one another. And I think that there's a couple of things that are really crucial to enable that in someone. And these are terms actually that I first came up with when I was doing a lot of facilitation work, and I was training a lot of facilitators. And they're two terms that I call emotional agility and emotional fluency. And I define emotional fluency as the ability to understand and relate to and be present with the full spectrum of the human experience, from the really, really bad to the really, really good. And then emotional agility is how easy it is for you to actually move through those emotions. So you might find that someone could be really emotionally fluent, and this could be maybe someone that relates to the word empath. I think this is a really common example.
Mhm.
But when it comes to certain emotion, like anger, they get really stuck. So emotional agility is freeing yourself to be able to release an emotion as it's felt, to not hold on to it, to not allow yourself to be stuck in that emotion. Just like a little kid, they go through 75 emotions in a minute.
Yeah.
This is a natural state, actually. That's a free state. But all the conditioning culturally, I think, being polite and being nice and all these things has meant that a lot of the time we deny our emotion, and it sits there and we get stuck in it, or we've had traumatic experiences, maybe, where there's been violence or anger, as an example. And that then instigates this sense that that's not safe. It's not safe to feel those emotions. All of that's impacting, I think, our broader ability to accept, right? And to hold that awareness in its full meaning, like awareness to be aware. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, but I hope that even introducing you guys to some of those terms provides somewhat of a framework to navigate. Because it's not just you're either emotionally intelligent or you're not. I think it's a lot more nuanced than that. And I think a lot of people feel very deeply, actually, but they just don't know how to express that, and they don't know how to um yeah, talk about it, or wear it on the outside.
Yeah, in the work I do, you've hit it on the head in the sense that I have a lot of people that come to me because there's emotions
Yeah,
and they've been feeling, however, they have no language for it.
yeah,
And not only do they have no language, there's a lot of guilt that comes with
shame. Yeah,
the emotions that often get us stuck, the emotions that are heavy, like shame, anger, disgust, like all these things. And it really is around the ability to move, remove the good, bad, right, wrong, and just be
yeah,
and have the conversation about a very human thing, an emotion, and then really searching for language that gives them a place to express it and to
yeah,
talk through it. So yeah.
yeah, exactly.
And so how do you see this? This is such a big conversation, and I put it in the leadership context because I believe it affects our ability to lead so much. And I hear so much about leadership skills and very little about this part of leadership. And
Mm.
to me, it's everything when you
Yeah,
lead.
agreed. Yeah, well, I think, think about it. If you've ever tried to uh execute the 7 steps to happiness, right? If you're trying to follow the the step by step by step, but it's not something that you're actually experiencing or feeling, it's completely redundant. And I think, we've lived in a society that has put more emphasis on what we can see and less emphasis on what we can't see. And I think actually far more of the human experience is actually anchored in what we can't see.
Mhm.
And I think that for many people, that's this like revolution to really think about. And you gave a powerful example before we started recording. Someone could be saying something to your face, but you don't feel it's authentic. Well, there's two conversations that's happening there, right? There's the thing that they're actually saying, or in the, you know, the workplace context. There's the thing that is being done, but then there's how it feels.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really the thing that defines culture. How are people feeling? You know, that's the thing that defines, I believe, a good leader. You know, if you feel a resonance with that leader, it's a felt sense. It's something that's invisible. You might have two people in front of you, they're saying the exact same speech. One person you resonate with deeply, you want to follow them, you know, you feel safe, you feel trust with that person, and the other, it falls flat, it's hollow. That's significant, you know, and there's a reality to that, there's a science to that. And I think the fact that people don't often touch those kind of experiences in conversation, what it creates is this perpetual self-doubt
Yeah.
that so many people experience. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's almost like, you know, I know in my body intuitively, I can feel, and I'm that person. I have that, I mean, we all do, but I have that sense of, you know, I tell people I hear on all these different levels.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like when I don't listen to it, it's a level of self-betrayal
Totally.
to a truth that done often enough for me,
Mm,
it's almost crazy making.
totally.
Because just because I see something, if I feel different, I'm more likely to trust this. And
Yeah.
I think we all are intuitively likely to
Mhm.
trust this, but society has said to us, don't listen to that.
Yeah. And people end up living, you know, decades in that space of what you've described perfectly as self-betrayal. And I think it, you know, that is the best way of explaining it. Because when your whole system's online, you have guidance, you have an internal GPS. Where an animal, you know, that instinct is innate, and it's innate because it's there to help us survive, you know. And so when you look at the pandemic of mental health that we see in our world, the amount of people that have low grade or high grade kind of chronic stress, they're not healthy, you know, there's a lot of inflammation in their system, they are lonely, like all of these layers that, you know, affecting more people than not in the Western world right now. I look at that and think, you know, that is an army of people that have every step of the way been convinced to go against what what
Mhm.
they what they know is the truth
Mhm.
for them. And that's the real thing that needs to heal. You know,
Yeah.
that's and there's so many layers. And I think, you know, when you touch on this in conversation, and I'm sure this is true for maybe someone listening right now. So I'm talking to you. um, it can be hard to hear it because when you sit with it, you've kind of got to face the journey of self-forgiveness, the forgiveness of others, the path that you have to walk to stand in you again and say, okay, well, X amount of time has passed. I've made the decisions I've made. I'm responsible for those decisions, you know, and I need to empower myself through taking responsibility. It can be a very, very painful thing to do.
Mhm.
Um, but
Mhm.
it's also the path to liberate yourself.
Yeah, and you know, I think when we talk about taking responsibility, I think oftentimes people listening hear it as blame yourself and
Yeah.
and make yourself
Free
wrong.
yourself. It's
And
actually
and
free
and
yourself.
responsibility is very freeing because it really, I break it down as your ability to respond.
Yeah.
And so you have new information, you have a new knowing, you have a new awareness, you have your ability to adapt and respond
Yeah.
and move from what you have traditionally done that hasn't been effective for you.
That's it.
As you were talking, a story came back to me from when I first came to Canada. So my mom's a dancer, and dance is just hobby in our house. And when I was very young, my mom put me in ballet, and I did not like ballet at all. And I remember coming home and asking my mother, like I told her I was very confused at class in my own language. I'm sure I didn't say confused, but I was confused. And she was like, why? And I said, I don't understand what they're doing. My mom said, what do you
Why are they
mean?
doing this?
They're dancing. And I said, but they're counting. And I said, they're counting like 1, 2, 3. My mother goes like, well, what's wrong with that? And I said, why don't they just feel the music
Mm,
and move? And that young girl, that part of me is always stuck with me because there's such a truth in that.
yeah,
Like, why don't we just tune in and feel
yeah.
and surrender to what is? And
Mm,
and so that little girl continues to guide me, you know.
mm. I
Let's
love that.
tune in and just feel. Um, so you touched on it, but I want to dive into um, why do so many of us struggle with this emotional awareness, um, what we call all of emotional intelligence? What is it about our society and the structure of it that has to be such a struggle?
Yeah, well, okay, so maybe let's break it down like this. In order to really start developing the sense that you're talking about, you need to have a sense of your own center. And so when you think about the world, society, media, school, family pressures, you start to see that there's your center. And then from a very young age, there's this surround sound of so many layers of influence.
Mm.
And this is why, meditators will say every single person needs to meditate. It's going to change the world. Or yogis say everyone should have a yoga practice, or Christians will say everyone needs to pray. Like, the passion, I believe, that's being felt is that they've found a vehicle to come home to that part of themselves, to find their center again. They have a practice that through all the noise in the world, they are able to come back to that inner voice that can listen on many levels. But for many, many people that don't have any kind of practice like that, or maybe they're doing the thing right, but they don't have the sanctity of the relationship with that thing, you know, you get lost. Like, how could you not get lost?
Yeah.
How can you not get lost in this world where there's just so much noise? And for most people, when you ask them the question, what's the longest amount of time you've spent truly alone? They can't they can't think. Like, and then you say, well, it doesn't count if you're home alone, but the TV's on or the radio's on or you're listening to a podcast. Like, actually just sitting with you,
Mhm.
um, and starting to figure out, that there's something your inner voice wants to tell you, that could be very different to the input that you're getting from the world. Um, the visual I get is like, when Harry Potter and Voldemort are having the final kind of, confrontation, and their two powers are coming out of their wands, and it's like the internal versus external forces. I think that's a nice way of kind of using an analogy to describe it. You've got to empower that inner strength
Yeah.
to be able to, when it's necessary, go against the external pressure. And when that gets strong enough, and this could feel so far away depending on your starting point, but truly when that gets strong enough, the world will start to harmonize to you. You become that center point of gravity. And I mean, there's also ways, sometimes when I do interviews, I actually explain this more in a scientific way. And I think that can be helpful. You have an electromagnetic field. Like, there is a center point of your electromagnetic field. It'll be somewhere between, your heart and your sternum. This is your center. Like, it's not a concept. It's a physical reality just as much as it is a spiritual one. Um, that a lot of people have been disconnected from. And there's physical layers to that too, depending on how you're actually looking after your body. Like, do you have a strong body? Are you feeding it with good food? How's your microbiome? Like, these things actually do contribute to your sense of being able to stand strong and tall and proud in the world. And if you can allow that part of you actually to be the thing that guides you through the world, like if you can walk from that place, literally imagine when you're walking, if there was the center point of view, if that was the thing that was going first every time you walk, you stand differently.
You
You know,
do.
that's something that every person has, but so many people have been disconnected from. And
Mm.
so, of course, that results in judgment and retaliation and defense and feeling that, you know, life's a bitch and then you die and the world's a terrible place. And
Yeah.
you end up in that headspace and that state of consciousness because you don't have a sense of who you actually are, which is you're a miracle. You're a walking, talking, profoundly intelligent and not just intellectual, intelligent being that is
Mhm.
pure consciousness and is self-aware and, you know, layers and layers and layers of miracle that make you you. And very, very few people have a sense of even remotely who they are. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
they think that they're their car. They think that they're their new pair of shoes. Like, you devalue yourself on such a profound level, with very little awareness. And I think that kind of reality is the starting point as to why people struggle to find that more emotional intelligence, which I want to define that too. When I say emotional, I literally mean the origin of the word, which is motion. It's energy in motion. So when I think about emotion, I see it as the energy, the life force that is constituting you, your decisions, your behavior, you know, your electromagnetic field. It's coming from your nervous system, you know, which is really the thing that's running the show.
Yeah.
Um,
It,
so
it knows
it,
all.
it
It,
knows all, right? And it's kept the score through everything that you've ever experienced, and it's picked up on every little thing that's happening around you when your brain can't. It can only process, you know, a microcosm of reality. Your nervous system's absorbing all of that energy and transmuting it. It's incredible when you understand it. Um, that when I say emotional intelligence, that's what I mean. You know, to have that intelligence be something that you're actually experiencing in the felt sense, and you're not shutting down. And, you know, to second that, I think, yeah, we have a world that just loves to only believe in the things that we can, you know,
see,
touch. It's like,
see in touch. Yeah.
and that makes it really hard because to start to learn some of these things is, yes, there's a science and there's actually objective proof that everything I'm saying is real and true. Um, but you need to have an open mind, I think, to start to wrap your head around some of those those greater ideas that reality is extremely complex, right? Like, what you're able to perceive through your five senses is a grain of sand in an infinite beach. But reality is still happening, you know, just because you can't perceive it all. The way that this room looks, the way I'm experiencing this room is very, very different to what is actually going on.
Mhm.
And for anyone that's had any kind of experience where they've been in an altered state of consciousness, like, you'll start to see, okay, reality's not what I thought it was.
Yeah.
But that's true on an infinite scale,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
I think it's good to remember that, you know, sometimes there's a truth that I'm not able to touch with my two hands physically, but that doesn't mean it's not true. And I think that belief is actually essential in any kind of transformation, right? Because if you're always to only take reality based on what's happening now, you can't change.
You can't.
You know,
That's,
it's like
that's
there's no room to change. And that's the Steve Jobs of the world, with the people that could see, you know, 50 years into the future and imagine
and
what's
trust and
possible. Yeah.
trust and trust, right?
Yeah.
Because I think our creativity and our imagination is a gift we all have. And it comes from, you know, I believe that I when I'm centered, I download stuff, right? That's for me.
Mhm.
And the question is, will I trust the brilliance? Because oftentimes what comes to me is way bigger than me. or way bigger than I believe myself to be would be the proper language.
Yeah.
And it's learning to trust that so that I can expand. You know, this is such a profound conversation, and the reason I wanted to sit down with you and I want to continue having these conversations with different people is because you were talking about a journey inward
Mm.
so we can go outward.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, when I work with clients and they start going outward, I go, but that's not here. So I wanna bring it
Yeah.
in here. Because it's so difficult for people to center and really look at me.
Yeah.
What am I feeling? What is my perception, and own it as mine? It's not necessarily the truth, but it's mine.
Yeah.
And just to begin to do that awareness, and as they go in, when they start to come back out, you just see this blossoming of newness. And for me, I say it's a practice of going in so you
Yeah.
can come out, going in so you can come out. And it's necessary as leaders.
Totally. I think that there's something important to highlight in this as well, that if you've been kind of out of your body for a really long time, it can be hard to even understand what we're talking about, you know, because the perception, and I journeyed that, you know, so to share that, um, when I started to really understand this, you know, that I exist in a time-space continuum and I have a physical body that, you know, there's a distance between my physical body and this wall, right? Like at one point in my journey, I had so much trauma from what I had put my body through that I couldn't actually feel, I couldn't sense. Like when I tried to sit with it, I couldn't sense how the distance between that wall and my body. And it was funny because when I started to do that level of work, you know, that level of embodiment to come back into my body and to turn things online again, you know, the different center points of intelligence in me, um, it was extremely confronting
Mm-hmm.
how much I couldn't feel. And it was heartbreaking, you know. So I want whoever needs to hear that to understand that it can take time,
It,
and it's okay, you know, and it's like any awareness or sense, you can slowly develop that ability over time. It's funny because a lot of people in my life used to say to me, Nick, you're so out there, you know, and I never really thought twice about it. You know, but the more I started to come inward, I realized, wow, I was literally out there. Like my consciousness was literally out there. And it's been a process of actually coming in again and
mm-hmm.
coming back into my body, loving, feeling comfortable, you know, being able to experience pleasure. Like these things are really, I think, profoundly important in life, and also in leadership, because when we're not a whole person, you better bet your ass that that's going to play out in one way or another once you inherit power, you
Oh
know,
my
which is a
gosh.
whole other conversation.
That's a whole other
Yeah.
conversation, an interview, and
Yeah.
it's such an important one. Um, when I as you're talking, so my journey, one of the things I did was competitive bodybuilding, and I remember my first posing practice, and it was the first time I got present to the level of my disconnection.
Mm,
And I invite people to really consider that a lot of times we live here,
yeah,
and here is not connected to all of this.
exactly.
And it's not connected. I know for myself, it was not connected because I didn't have a love of body.
Hmm.
I didn't have a love of self. And so how I dealt with it was just not to be connected, not to look, not to feel, not to be
Yeah.
present. And here I am in a practice, and to be able to pose is total presence. Like what's your
Mhm.
little toe doing?
Yeah.
What's this doing? And you got to sit and stare at what is.
Mm,
And I remember my coach having such loving language for
Mm.
me, and I could not see what he was talking about.
Wow. Yeah.
And it was so confronting because all I kept thinking through the practice is, how can he see this and say these things, and I can only see this?
Yeah.
And he's one of my favorite people because he gently brought me back together and brought me back into my body, and it began my journey of self-love, self-acceptance, self-awareness, and listening,
Cool.
you know. And so there's such truth in what you're saying, and people will say, well, what's that have to do with my ability to lead, and what's that have to do?
Everything.
It has everything to do
Yeah.
with, because when you and I are in crisis, it's
Mm.
easy to be out here when
Yeah.
we're really required to come back in here and ground and sit when
And
we're,
it's trust. I
yeah,
think that that's a really important, as a leader, I think one of the most powerful assets you have is for people to trust you.
yeah,
And it's actually it's an animal instinct. Like, sure, there are many leaders that say have won trust temporarily through means of manipulation or whatever it is, but it's only a matter of time before
it comes full
that
circle,
yeah,
all
that veil is lifted, right? So to really build true foundational trust with your people, unless you have this, it's not actually, it's like, trust is not an intellectual thing. When you
no,
feel when you feel safe with someone, it's a state. It's a state of embodiment. It's like, you know, your sexual experiences. Like, why do you feel really safe with someone and really not safe with another person? And it's often not a technical thing, right? It's a thing that you can't quite
yeah,
touch.
put your finger
Yeah,
on. And I think, it comes back to kind of where you started. um my ability to be trusted has a lot to do with my ability to come home and trust me,
exactly. That's
right?
where
and,
it begins.
and so it's that work to be in my body, grounded, aware, in tuned, present with me,
Mm-hmm.
that allows me to have that energy and what people call confidence
Mm-hmm.
that people feel, so they can in turn trust me. So the work is always here, and we think the
Yeah,
work is out there in many
yeah.
ways. Um, if you were to give everyone listening one strategy, because I know we've covered a lot and you've dropped some gems and you've dropped some strategies, what would be a starting place?
Yeah. I mean, all the things that I've mentioned. Okay, here's a good one. There's a lot that are coming to mind, but
You can give
one
two,
of
but
yeah, one of the things that I'm trying to think, like, what's the highest return on the simplest task? And one of the questions I ask in Love Out Loud is, are you making your choice from a place of fear or a place of love? And
you are so in my brain right
and I quantify the felt sense of both of those spaces. And fear is contraction and judgment and separation and um isolation. um it's a narrow vision, like, literally, when you're in a state of fear, your peripheral vision shuts down. You cannot see what's either side of you, because think about when you were in a state of fear running from a lion, you just had to be able to make very quick, rapid decisions that were only considering of yourself, because it was life or death, and that's the state that fear puts you in. Whereas love is connected and creative and altruistic and divergent and expansive. And I think to hold that awareness in each of your moments, it just takes you out of what's the thing I should do. It takes you out of what's expected of me right now, and it takes you into the body where you're like, do I feel expanded in this decision, or do I feel contracted? And if you can simply hold that awareness, your life will change.
now.
Just that one thing, your life can change radically. It's kind of like a mindfulness practice if you can really hold that through your day. And a little while ago, I actually interviewed Katie Hendricks, and she had a different way of saying the same thing, which was also very powerful because she teaches on relationships. And she said in relationships, you're only ever making two decisions. You're moving closer to someone or you're moving further away from them. And it's the same thing, you're choosing love or you're choosing fear. But I think in that context, it added kind of this relational layer that was very transformative for me, because I realized these are the places I actually disconnect. Like, it's too uncomfortable for me to be in a relationship in these areas. And that's my work. Like, if I want to improve my ability to be present, I've got to figure out how to work through that and not disconnect when it gets difficult.
And what you're saying right now is so key to highlight for everyone, because when I look at all this work, and I've been in this work for many years, and I remind people that this is a practice. And so there's no arriving.
Yeah,
It's
it's no
this
destination.
constant expansion. And I'm always present to whenever I grow, or I begin to grow, whether it be in a new relationship, a new endeavor. There's a moment where I feel like, all my work, where is it? Like, where did it go?
Yeah,
And it's because the level of practice has to expand.
that's
And
it.
so it really is around understanding that you might be starting here, because this is a practice of expansion, getting to
Mhm.
know myself and expanding and really getting present. I call it, to my brilliance, my uniqueness, my giftings, what's special about me on this planet, and really getting present to it. And it's a constant expansion. And sometimes you contract because you're about to expand and you're like, what happened?
Mm.
And I want to highlight that, as you say, this is my area of growth. Mine is very similar, in terms of relatedness and in those deep relationships. I dance as we do. And so it's a practice. It's even as I do business, there's moments where I want to run,
Mm.
and it's a practice to stay and feel the discomfort and
Yeah.
be present and move inwards versus
And
hightailing
it
it back to
feels it feels so counterintuitive. I just want to like sort
it.
of name that. Like, it's
It
not
is.
it's gonna feel like the wrong thing to do.
I describe it as, there's a level of excitement and fear kind of mixed up together.
Hmm.
And it's not a fear of, in terms of safety, it's a fear of unknown, it's a fear of uncertainty. And
Yeah.
and I think what
Yeah.
I have learned is to live in the presence of that, like to move into the presence of that, and to tell myself
Mm.
I must be on the right track, I must be going in the right direction, because there's that feeling
Yeah.
that has me, one, wanting to retreat, but knowing that I need to go, move
Yeah.
this way. And it's doing the work to stay in that and welcome it and say, this is good, this is normal,
Yeah.
this is even exciting.
Yeah.
Oh, so good. I could talk to you all day. Let's talk a little bit about your work right now. And what stopped me in my tracks in Bali was when you started talking about the work you're doing with the app and
Hmm.
the tech side of this emotional. And I was like, what? I
Yeah.
need to know more. Like, how is this all happening? So can you touch a little bit on that for us?
Of course, yeah. So the startup that I'm working on at the moment is a technology that actually measures emotion. And I guess, a brief overview of why and how. So my early journey catalyzed this journey for me, this lifelong journey of wanting to solve this problem of emotional incapacity. And I spent many years doing that in what I would say is more of an analog way, right? Sitting with people, facilitating sessions with, yeah, tens of hundreds of thousands of people in countries all over the world. And I loved that work so much. And I think, like, so many facilitators, you get to a point where you're like, my impact is limited here, there's only one of me. And yeah, of course, you can create a methodology, and you can teach other people how to deliver that. But I just had such a deep belief that if we could create a shift in consciousness when it came to the way that we related to emotion, the world changes on a profound level. And so I was obsessed with figuring out how to do that at scale, where there was a frictionless way of creating impact. And I think when you're thinking along those lines, it's just a matter of time before technology kind of like reveals itself and is like, hey, this is the way to do that if you can really pull it off. And it was a crazy idea, using technology to track something that historically has been completely subjective. I now know that that's actually not true. There's a whole understanding of emotion through neuroscience, which is not subjective at all. It's an objective trigger that's happening in the nervous system. But it's interesting. It's almost like the way we've understood emotion culturally and the way that science and neuroscience understands emotion are two different things. And maybe I can explain in a little bit, but the way the product is working is through wearable technology. We've found a way to pull data from what's called a PPG sensor. So that's the sensor that would exist in your Apple Watch, your Aura Ring, your Whoop, your Fitbit, depending on what you wear, if you wear a wearable. We pull that data into a machine learning model, which we've trained off a clinical data set. And we've used ML and AI basically to teach the data how to translate valence and arousal, or the layman's terms for valence is sentiment or pleasantness. So where are you on a scale of unpleasant to pleasant, and where is your stress? So imagine it's like a XY axis. If you're really pleasant and really stressed, you're ecstatic or excited. If you're unpleasant, low arousal, you're probably sad, depressed, melancholy, these kind of states. And this is actually something that's firing in the nervous system every 200 milliseconds. So what's interesting about that is it's a response to stimulus. It's happening, 5 times a second. It's actually precognisant. And to me, that was a very transformative thing to understand about emotion. Because the way that we've been indoctrinated to understand emotion is happiness, sadness, gratefulness, joy. That's actually not emotion. That's the meaning we're prescribing to emotion, and what happiness means for me is actually different, probably, to what happiness means for you, and how we're experiencing it could be completely different. So what In Truth seeking to do is actually, for the first time, bring a visibility to this objective layer of emotionality so that we can actually start to separate, okay, this is the objective data and this is what I'm making that mean. And this is where we can have our power, right? Because we can't change the response to stimulus or an animal. It would be like telling a dog to change the way it reacts when it hears another dog. Like there's something instinctive about how our nervous system's reacting to its environment. And yes, with deep mindfulness practice, etc., you can change the baseline of your nervous system. I believe that fundamentally. But what's been more popular over, I guess, the millennia through practices of, say, psychology, is to change the way we make things mean. What do we define our experiences as? But this is what the layer that we would call in neuroscience feeling, and that's happening seconds after the emotion has been triggered. So our tech is, first of all, touching that objective layer, which so far has been unconscious to us. We've had no visibility over that. And then also inviting the user to start to correlate, what they make that objective data mean, so that it really is bringing, a lot of what's been unknown, unconscious, invisible into the forefront of our self-awareness, so that we can start to see the emotional patterns that actually govern our life, and we can use that to make decisions more consciously, more effectively, with more wisdom. But the utility is endless. We have everything from what we've talked about, in the first responder market, through to the ways that this is going to be used to disrupt mainstream psychology, to dating apps and
Yeah.
entertainment. And
Absolutely.
it's really very exciting to kind of so someone recently described it as like what you're creating is like the new internet. Like it has the potential to permeate through so many different things. And I think with a tech startup, usually the path is you choose an industry and you go deep and figure out how to disrupt that industry. But the interesting thing about In Truth is it has the potential really to disrupt every industry.
To disrupt the world, really.
Yeah.
Because we're all feeling beings.
Yeah.
And we're all emotional beings. I think what excited me about this as we spoke and as you presented that day was that I love this body of work, and I started building, like you, processes and models and different things, because whenever I talk about it with someone, it was so out there and so intangible. And I kept going, well, no one can move
Yeah.
concretely with these intangibles. And
Yeah.
what excited me was you were moving it from just subjective
Hmm.
to data.
Yeah.
And for me to have data to support processes just gives a level of truth in truth.
Yeah.
To it that I think will be so validating and transformative for the person who is attempting to understand what's going on,
Yeah.
one, and two, who's committed to change,
Hmm.
right? It's so exciting, so
Well,
exciting.
yeah. It's definitely an obsession for me where this can go. And I think even beyond the tech, the premise or the question it's posing, to the world is something that really is probably the thing that excites me most. What if we could actually start to see the invisible? How does that change the way that we fundamentally relate, to life? And um I think it's going to be a wild ride.
I think
And
I think that's going to be the quote for the show.
yeah.
Say that again.
um to really be able to see what's been invisible to us. That's if you think about some of the most brilliant inventions, that's kind of been at the crux of all of them. Like electricity, that there was always this electrical current, but we weren't able to capture it.
Mhm.
And electricity gave us the ability to do that. And I think, or the internet, there was um a version of, I don't know, the human mycelium network, like this telepathic connection that we all have, and the internet was able to plug it. This is a very kind of conceptual way of explaining it, but I think for a divergent thinker, it's something fun to nerd out on. The internet was able to tap into that intelligence that was there. Like the internet, in a way, already existed, but it was invisible.
Yeah.
And then the realization of it, the invention of the internet as we know it, allowed me to call you in a different part of the world and experience this kind of version of telepathy, right? And my hope is that In Truth, in its own right, creates a similar pivotal point for humanity where we can actually validate the thing that um has controlled us, for forever, emotion.
And
Um,
that has also gone unvalidated
yeah,
for far too long in a very.
exactly. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
For those of you who have been listening, we have been sitting down and chatting and having a beautiful, insightful chat with Nicole Gibson. Nicole, if someone wanted to reach out, find you, learn more, how do they do that?
Thank you, Susan. You can find me on socials. LinkedIn's under my full name, or Instagram's Nick Gibson, NIC Gibson _. If you wanted to check out the tech, you can go to intruth.io and sign up for our beta. I'd love all of you guys to use it and try it and let us know how it and if it transforms your world.
Sign up.
Yeah. Mhm.
Oh my goodness, exciting. So remember, the first person we each lead is ourselves. So as we part, please know you are brilliant. Know you are oh so very special. And we do this work because the world is waiting. Blessings, and I will talk to you soon.
Thank you all for tuning in to the Influencer's Journey. Join us every week as we continue to explore the stories behind the leaders who inspire us all. Remember, the first person you lead is yourself, and influence is a byproduct of inspired action. Until next time, know you are brilliant, know you are special, and the world is waiting for your unique gift. This is the Influencer's Journey.